Good morning, everyone, or good evening for those of you who are in Europe. So this is a webinar on the use of the three treasures remedies for digestive problems, which, as you know, as practitioners, are incredibly common. Before discussing various patterns, however, I would like to discuss two or three key digestive symptoms for which I think we should really be precise in defining. And the first one is the famous distension, which we use all the time, which in Chinese is zhang, and you can see the Chinese character there, which means distension. And Western patients in English-speaking countries would not usually use that word, but they would use the word bloating. So bloating is probably the closest to the Chinese symptom of zhang. By the way, Chinese patients do use that word all the time. So diagnosis in China is very easy because Chinese patients use the same words that are in Chinese medicine books. And Chinese patients will even say, I've got zhang tung, distending pain. So first of all, let's describe it. The feeling of distension is both subjective and objective. Subjectively, the patient feels bloated, like blown up like a balloon. But distension is also objective because you actually can see it. The abdomen is distended like a balloon, and you can palpate it as well. The abdomen feels literally like a balloon. It's kind of hard, but at the same time, it rebounds on palpation. So whenever we see the word distension in Chinese medicine books or zhang, that indicates qi stagnation. Distension is the symptom of qi stagnation, one of the most significant symptoms of qi stagnation. And talking about qi stagnation in the context of digestive problems, I'd like to stress straight away something I usually stress in my lectures, that qi stagnation occurs in the liver, of course. When the liver loses its free flow of qi, there is zhang or distension. However, it occurs in many other organs too. So I'd like to stress that straight away. That qi stagnation does not necessarily and then does not always mean that it is liver qi stagnation. One can have qi stagnation in the stomach, in the intestines, in the spleen, in the context of digestive problems. In other contexts, for example, in the context of mental emotional problems, qi stagnation is very common in the heart and lungs. So nearly every organ can suffer from qi stagnation, and they can suffer from qi stagnation directly. It doesn't have to be through the liver. The second thing I wanted to stress is also the emotional origin of qi stagnation. Chinese books and also many Western books always stress anger or repressed anger. But it's not the only emotion that leads to qi stagnation. And a very important one in our patients in the West is worry. And another possible emotion that may lead to qi stagnation is also guilt and fear as well. So we should not oversimplify and say qi stagnation is always due to the liver and is due to anger. It's not like that. It can affect practically any organ, and it can come from different emotions. And I'd like to show you some effects of qi stagnation on the pulse. The pulse is very useful and very important in identifying the root of the problem. And it reflects the qi stagnation quite well. For example, in liver qi stagnation, the pulse is it could be wary on both sides, or very commonly it would be wiry only on the left. So we should not expect the pulse to be necessarily completely wiry. And indeed, I would say that if the pulse isn't wiry, then there isn't Qi stagnation, I would say. In stomach Qi stagnation, the pulse will be wiry on the right guan position. In spleen-Qi stagnation, the pulse will be wiry on the left and weak on the right. And finally, in stagnation of Qi in the intestines, which is actually incredibly common, especially in lower burner problems, the pulse is wiry on both Qi positions. The Qi position is the third position, as you can see in those diagrams. And I'd like to draw your attention to this type of pulse because it's very common. And this pulse also indicates one observation I've made in the last few years, that although when we look at Chinese medicine books and we look at the patterns, the syndromes, we have small intestine syndromes and large intestine syndromes separately. However, in digestive problems, and in my experience, one can't really separate the two. And if there is Qi stagnation, it is a Qi stagnation that affects both the small intestine and the large intestine, and it is manifested with a pulse like that, wiry on both bottom positions, Qi positions. And something else I'd like to draw your attention to in this type of pulse, this type of pulse is also not a good sign, because I see this type of pulse in kind of serious digestive problems, digestive diseases rather, such as ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease. But I should stress something. I've said that in Qi stagnation of the intestines, both large intestine and small intestine are involved, but that's strictly in the context of digestive problems. Because, for example, the small intestine has other syndromes that are not actually digestive syndromes. So the pulse reflects very well where the Qi stagnation is and how to distinguish liver Qi stagnation from stomach Qi stagnation or Qi stagnation in the intestines. In this slide here, I illustrate some of the major points I use all the time in digestive problems of the middle burner on the left and the lower burner on the right. And I use these points all the time, mostly irrespective of the syndrome, whatever syndrome they have. It may be a deficiency, it may be Qi stagnation, it may be dampness, but whatever syndromes they have, I would consider these to be the most essential points that I would use most times. So for the middle burner, I would use REN 12 and stomach 21 and REN 10. Why REN 10? Because REN 10 stimulates the descending of stomach Qi. And in very many problems, digestive problems of the middle burner, the stomach Qi is not descending or rebelling upwards. So it's a very important thing to do, to stimulate the descending of stomach Qi with REN 10. And stomach 21, I use it as a general point for most stomach patterns, both full or empty. Now for the lower burner, I use those 3 points, and especially stomach 25 and spleen 15. For example, someone with chronic diarrhea, I would use those points all the time. Also for Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, those would be essential points. or also for irritable bowel problems, when a person has an alternation of loose stools and constipation, which is incredibly common. So stomach 25 is good for loose stools or diarrhea, and spleen 15 is good to stimulate the bowel movements. So I often use those two together to regulate the bowel movements. And REN 6 is there not so much to tonify qi, which it does, it's called qi high, but is there primarily to move qi. REN 6, besides tonifying qi, also moves qi in the lower abdomen and in the intestines. So I repeat, those points in these two pictures here are points that I would use practically in every digestive symptom, in addition, of course, to other points according to the syndrome. So we've described or defined the feeling of distension. We now define the feeling of oppression, which is my own translation of the Chinese word men. And let's first of all describe this symptom of oppression. Is unlike distension, the feeling of oppression is purely subjective. Objectively, there's nothing to be seen or palpated. It's purely objective, and it's literally is a feeling of oppression or a feeling of weight. Maybe some patients might call it tightness as well, but especially weight. And it occurs in the middle burner. You don't have a feeling of oppression in the lower burner, so mostly in the middle burner and chest. And I repeat, it is purely subjective. And if you look at the Chinese character for it, it's very evocative, because there is a door with a heart inside. So the presence of the heart radical in Chinese medicine terms always suggests something to do with the Shen. So the Chinese character is very interesting because it suggests strongly an emotional origin of this symptom of oppression, which it usually does. And what does the feeling of oppression mean? It usually means phlegm. It may also be severe qi stagnation, but usually phlegm or also both together. So that's the second digestive symptom I wanted to describe, and those are possible points that could be used. And I'm going to say a few things about stomach 40 a bit later. And the third symptom that I wanted to describe is a feeling of fullness, also used a lot in Chinese books in the context of digestive problems, which is called man in Chinese. And let's first of all describe it. A feeling of fullness is both subjective and objective. Subjectively, you feel full. Literally, you feel full, like when you've eaten too much, you can't eat anymore, and you have a slight nausea as well. It's different than distension. Distension is when you feel bloated like a balloon. Fullness, literally you feel full like you've eaten a lot. And objectively also, you can feel fullness on palpation. It's not like a balloon, like a distension, but it is hard. So when you palpate the abdomen, it feels hard. Not as elastic as the feeling of distension. So we should be precise. If distension means qi stagnation, and fullness means dampness, usually, or retention of food. And it's also a very common digestive symptom. And there at the bottom in the box, I have possible points that I would use for fullness. Notice those points. If you look at the epigastric fullness, notice there stomach 19 and 21, which we already mentioned. And stomach 19 is probably one of the most important local points for it, because in fact it's called purung, which means can't take anymore, can't eat anymore, because one is too full. So stomach 19 is specifically for full conditions of the stomach, especially with dampness, and it also stimulates the descending of Stomach-Qi. And so does Ren 10, which I've mentioned before. And so does stomach 34 as a distal point. And those 2 points, spleen-4 and pericardium 6, there are the opening points of the Chung Mei. And the Chung Mei I also use very frequently in full conditions of digestive problems, especially when the pulse is full. I use spleen-4 and pericardium 6 together as a couple to regulate the Chung Mei, and it stimulates the descending of Stomach-Qi, subdues rebellious Qi. And I repeat, I especially use it when the pulse is full and wiry. So those points I just mentioned are for the middle burner, and for the lower burner, I also use the Chung Mei, as you can see there, spleen-4 and pericardium 6. I use stomach 25, which I already mentioned. And stomach 27 is also a very good point to make Stomach-Qi descend in the lower burner. And 2 other points, which I will mention again, are stomach 37 and 39. They are the lower He point of the large intestine and small intestine, respectively. And they are the points that I used for the organs, for the intestines. And they're called lower He points, because the He point of the large intestine would be in the elbow, large intestine 11. And the He point of the small intestine would be small intestine 8. But you do not use, or at least I don't use, those 2 points for problems of the intestine's organs themselves. Small intestine 8 and large intestine 11 will be used more for the channel problems of small intestine and large intestine. And there is a passage actually in the Neijing which actually says that. The passage says the real He point of the small intestine and large intestine are 37 and 39 on the legs. So, in other words, if there is a digestive problem with diarrhea, loose stools, constipation, distension, pain, I would nearly always use those 2 points, 37 and 39, and as I said, nearly always together, for the reason I mentioned earlier, that in my experience, in digestive problems of the lower burner, it's very hard to distinguish some that are purely due to the small intestine and some only the large intestine. They're usually together. And these points that are indicated here on these slides, I repeat, they're points according to symptoms irrespective of the syndrome. So there will be then other points according to syndrome, i.e. Qi stagnation, blood stasis, dampness, etc. Feeling of stuffiness I will not talk about because it's not very common. Don't worry if you can't absorb everything. You will get handouts. You will get these notes. So don't worry if you miss something. You will get a PDF of all these notes. And this table here summarizes the difference between distension, oppression, fullness, and stuffiness. All the things that we have already described. How do they feel objectively, if any, and what they indicate. So let's talk about epigastric pain, pain in the middle burner, above the navel. These are all the possible patterns. I will not discuss all these patterns, but only the main ones with the remedies. And I just wanted to show you this diagram first. In the middle burner, there's a very important interaction between liver and stomach and spleen, a very well-known interaction, which is often interpreted in terms of the 5 elements, or wood and earth, across the Kerr cycle. And it's an extremely common situation when the liver affects the stomach and spleen. And it could be liver qi stagnation or rebellious liver qi from various emotions. Here in this diagram I've stressed anger, but remember what I said. In my opinion, it could also be worry or guilt or fear. And I've noticed an interesting kind of correlation that anger can be manifested or repressed. And anger that is manifested leads more to rebellious qi, i.e. stomach qi rebelling upwards, nausea, belching, acid regurgitation. And by the way, notice I make a distinction between stomach qi rebelling upwards and stomach qi not descending. They may sound like the same thing, but they're not quite the same thing. And what's the difference? In stomach qi rebelling upwards, the stomach qi is really out of control and rebels, literally rebels upwards. And I'm using the word rebel as a direct translation of the Chinese word ni. In Chinese, this word would be ni, which literally means to rebel, to go against. So stomach qi really is out of control, rebels upwards, and you get nausea, belching, acid regurgitation, vomiting. With stomach qi not descending is not quite the same thing. So with stomach qi not descending, you will not get all those symptoms, but more like a feeling of fullness or a feeling of distension, because it's not going down, but it's not actually rebelling upwards. And the treatment is different, and the kind of points you would use are also different. So I wanted to specify that distinction. And secondly, the liver across the middle burner can affect the spleen. So if it affects the stomach, it either causes rebellious stomach qi, or it causes stomach qi not descending, which is not quite the same thing as I just described. Or the liver can affect the spleen, causing loose stools, and also some feeling of distension. And that's more likely to happen when the anger, if it is anger, is repressed. So let's talk about this pattern, which is extremely common. When I was in China, it's one of the most common patterns of Chinese patients, but Western patients also have this. Liver qi invading the stomach, causing stomach qi either to rebel upwards or not to descend. And the famous feeling of distension, as we have already described. In China, they make a very subtle distinction that this pain, the stomach pain, will be in the middle, but also radiating slightly to the right. I mean, I've not noticed it that much in Western patients, but that's the distinction they apply in China. And the pulse for this pattern should be wiry. If the pulse is not wiry, then it's not this pattern. And it may be wiry only on the left, and that's actually a very common situation, that this type of pulse with liver qi invading the stomach is wiry only on the left. Those are the main points I would use. Liver 14, by the way, is the point that regulates liver and stomach, or harmonizes liver and stomach together. So it is the local point for liver qi invading the stomach. Pericardium 6, I use it all the time in digestive problems because it affects the upper and the middle burner. It affects the stomach. That's why, by the way, pericardium 6 is used for nausea and morning sickness in pregnant women. Although it is on the pericardium channel, it affects the stomach very much. And it makes the stomach qi descend. But of course, another important reason for using it is in mental effect. So on the one hand, it has a direct effect on the stomach, but on the other hand, it also affects the shen, calms the shen, if there is irritability, anger, guilt, worry, etc. Stomach 21, I've already mentioned, is a very important local point, especially for full conditions of the stomach. I use it, and also makes stomach qi descend. Ren 12, I use it more to tonify than for full conditions. So I use it to strengthen the stomach. The Chinese explanation is you strengthen the stomach so that it is not invaded by the liver. And notice frequently in Chinese medicine there is a military metaphor, you know, like for example the pathogenic factors invade the body, and the body has the wei qi, and the wei qi is like a guard. And they say the same thing about this particular pattern, that you need to strengthen the stomach so that it stops being invaded by the liver. So Ren 12 and Stomach 36 are there to strengthen the stomach. And Gallbladder 34 is to move liver qi. There is a very famous prescription for this pattern, which is Chai Hu Shu Gan Tang, which, by the way, is the prescription for liver qi stagnation with abdominal pain. And in the Three Treasures, it is called Break into a Smile. Break into a Smile is a variation of Chai Hu Shu Gan Tang, which, I repeat, is the formula for abdominal distension and pain from qi stagnation, from liver qi stagnation. And these two pictures here are an illustration of liver qi stagnation, and that's an interesting concept. How do you see liver qi stagnation on the tongue? Paradoxically, you may not see it. If you read Chinese books, they will say that the tongue is purple on the sides in qi stagnation. I do not agree. I repeat, I do not agree, because for me, when the tongue is purple, it indicates blood stasis, which is a step further than qi stagnation and very different. So I repeat, I do not agree. The tongue is not purple in qi stagnation. If it is purple, it is blood stasis. Many times, if the qi stagnation is not very severe, it may not show on the tongue. You may not see it at all, which makes sense because qi is qi. Qi is non-substantial, and the tongue body color reflects blood more than qi. So do not be surprised if you see a patient with a digestive problem, a lot of distension, and the tongue doesn't show very much. It's not purple, it's not red. So do not be surprised of that. These two tongues in particular show a more advanced stage of liver qi stagnation. In more severe liver qi stagnation, it could be, the tongue could be red on the sides, as especially this tongue here on the right side. Okay, so it would only be red on the sides in severe liver qi stagnation, and I repeat, in many cases it may not show on the tongue, but follow the pulse. The pulse has to be wari. If it's not wari, it's not liver qi stagnation. Another pattern is phlegm heat in the stomach. This will be a more complex pattern. The one we just described, liver qi invading the stomach, is a fairly simple situation of qi stagnation of the liver from emotional problems affecting the stomach. This would be a more chronic condition. This pattern could derive also from qi stagnation, but after some time, months or years, the qi stagnation, by obstructing the movement of qi, it obstructs the transformation of fluids, and it can lead to phlegm. On the other hand, severe qi stagnation with time also leads to heat. So this is a more chronic pattern, a more complex pattern, and there might also be some underlying qi stagnation in this pattern. And the heat, what does the heat do? The heat creates anxiety. So in this type of pattern, there will be some anxiety, insomnia, and agitation. And the phlegm kind of obstructs the shen. And that picture that I have there is a fairly good indication of this pattern. Why? Because the whole tongue is swollen, and I relate the swelling of the tongue to phlegm. And if you notice, it's particularly swollen around the center, near on the sides of that crack. That big long crack is a heart crack, which indicates the tendency to mental emotional problems. And the deeper the heart crack it is, the worse it is. It also indicates that this person has been under emotional stress for a very long time. And notice the yellow coating inside the crack. That indicates phlegm heat, and it specifically indicates phlegm heat disturbing the shen. So that's a very good indication, that tongue, of this pattern. Phlegm affects the stomach very much because phlegm in the middle burner interferes with the descending of Stomach-Qi and the ascending of Spleen-Qi. And in fact, remember that phlegm in the middle burner is a very common cause of nausea. If someone complains of nausea or even vomiting, it might be due to phlegm. Of course, it can be due to liver qi invading the stomach, as we already described. But it might be due to phlegm, and is especially common as a cause of nausea in kind of middle age or old people, not so much in young people, although it can occur in young people as well. So remember, phlegm obstructs the middle burner, obstructs the stomach. It stops the descending of Stomach-Qi and is a frequent cause of nausea. Those are the points that I would use. Notice that we have some of the points that we already described. Stomach 21 we already described. I use it for full conditions. Ren 12 to strengthen the stomach to resolve phlegm. And we got Ren 13 then. It's an interesting distinction I'd like to make between Ren 13 and Ren 10. You remember a few minutes ago I said that rebellious Stomach-Qi is not exactly the same as Stomach-Qi not descending. So Ren 13 is a point that subdues rebellious Stomach-Qi. So when the person has a lot of nausea, vomiting, acid reflux, belching, hiccup, So REM13 actively subdues rebellious Stomach-Qi. REM10, on the other hand, stimulates the descending of Stomach-Qi, which is not the same thing. And of course, you can also use them together. If you have rebellious Stomach-Qi, I would probably use both REM13 to subdue rebellious Stomach-Qi and REM10 to help Stomach-Qi to descend. Pericardium 5 specifically resolves phlegm from the heart, from the Shen. And I'd like to say a few things about stomach 40, Feng Lung. Stomach 40 is always mentioned in connection with phlegm. People say to resolve phlegm, you use stomach 40. That is partly true. Why do I say partly true? It is true that stomach 40 resolves phlegm, but in my opinion, to resolve phlegm with acupuncture, you need a lot more points than just stomach 40. You need to actively stimulate the three burners, upper, middle, and lower burner. So one point I want to make is that, yes, stomach 40 does resolve phlegm, but not so much on its own. And the second point I wanted to make, that stomach 40 has many more functions than just that. And it's a great point. I use it all the time in stomach patterns, digestive problems with stomach patterns, especially full conditions. And it also subdues rebellious Stomach-Qi. And it affects the Shen. I would say these three things. One, in full conditions of the stomach. Two, subdues rebellious Stomach-Qi. And three, affects the Shen. It calms the mind. It calms the Shen. And four, by the way, besides the stomach, stomach 40 also affects the chest itself. For example, if you have the famous feeling of oppression of the chest, stomach 40 is a great point for that. So don't overlook all the other great functions that stomach 40 has. Pericardium 7 is there to calm the Shen and clear heat. And then on the head, notice I've got two of my favorite points on the head to calm the Shen. Du24 and gallbladder 13. Especially in combinations, those 2 points have a great effect in calming the Shen, treating insomnia and anxiety, but they also treat depression, and they treat memory, and they treat the Shen and the Hun. And they go particularly well together, those 3 needles, those 2 points, Du24 and gallbladder 13. And stomach 44 is there to clear stomach heat and also to make Stomach-Qi descend. There is a famous, great formula, Wen Dan Tang, is a formula from Sun Se Miao, which has the strange name of warming the gallbladder decoction. We don't have time to go into that, the explanation of the name. But it is a formula for phlegm heat, both of the lungs, of the heart, and also the stomach, as it is in this case. And the 3 treasures variation of it is called Clear the Soul. So the name Clear the Soul, I've given it that name because it can be used to calm the Shen, to treat Shen disturbances. But it is a variation of Wen Dan Tang, so it can also be used for digestive problems with phlegm heat in the stomach. Damp heat in the stomach is probably even more common. Dampness in digestive problems is extremely common. And it comes from what? As we all know, it comes from eating foods that lead to dampness, such as dairy foods and sugary foods. But it also comes from eating habits, eating in a hurry, eating standing up, eating at work. For example, when I was in England and I always asked my patients, what do you do for lunch? And those people who worked in London, they all, without really without any exception, they all said they had the sandwich while they were sitting at their computer that's still working. So that would be a cause of dampness in the digestive system, and of course also Qi stagnation. So as we said, in dampness we have this famous feeling of fullness, which we have described, which is different than distension. Plus symptoms of dampness such as a sticky taste. Nausea can also come from dampness. By the way, a sticky taste, which is called Ni in Chinese, which is a different Ni than the rebellious Qi, by the way, is very common in all Chinese books, is described, and Chinese patients do say that. But I find that, at least when I was working in England, if you ask a patient, do you have a sticky taste, they don't really know what you mean. And I suspect that what people call a metallic taste, which is relatively common, is actually the sticky taste of Chinese books. So I would interpret this so-called metallic taste, which many people mention, as a symptom of dampness. So if you look at the points, some of the points we already mentioned, like Ren 10, to stimulate the descending of stomach Qi. And notice that here we don't have rebellious stomach Qi, but we simply have rebellious stomach Qi not descending, which makes the dampness remain there. So you can't get rid of dampness if Qi does not move. So Ren 10 will be an important point to make stomach Qi descend. And so is stomach 21, which we already mentioned. And then many of the other points are points to eliminate dampness. A very important one would be Ren 9. So all those points, Ren 9, Spleen 9, Spleen 6, Bladder 20, 21, Ren 12, would all be points to eliminate dampness. Stomach 8 you only need to use, you don't need to use it in digestive problems. You would only use it if this person also has dull headaches, which frequently do come from dampness. And you would use stomach 8 and large intestine 4 only, I repeat, in case of dull headaches from dampness. And the 3 treasures remedy that is specific for damp heat in the stomach is ease the muscles. The name of the remedy is ease the muscles because it is also used, it can also be used for muscle ache from dampness in people with chronic fatigue syndrome. But it is a variation of a remedy, Yin, for damp heat in the stomach. And this is a very good example of damp heat, this sticky yellow coating. And by the way, from the tongue you can tell what predominates, because in damp heat there can be different variations, more or less dampness or more or less heat. In this case, I would say there is a lot of heat. Why? Because it's very dry. So there is dampness because it's sticky, but it's also dry. By the way, sticky and dry on the tongue is not a contradiction. This coating is sticky but dry, which indicates damp heat, but with a lot of heat. And notice something else on this tongue, which I'll probably come back to. Notice how the coating is basically in the middle, which is the stomach, the spleen, here, but also on the root. And that's a very important principle. It happens a lot. It's almost impossible to isolate damp heat purely in the middle burner. It just hardly ever happens in the tongue. So if someone has damp heat in the stomach here, the coating is yellow and sticky also on the root. So which means it's another thing I've noticed in digestive problems. The stomach is correlated to the large intestine, in Yang Ming, stomach and large intestine. The stomach is in the middle burner, large intestine lower burner, but in digestive problems, they're very often or nearly always connected. So if you have damp heat in the stomach, it would be very, very common that that would affect also the large intestine. And you can see it on this tongue very, very clearly. Next pattern is a deficiency pattern. So the previous 3 patterns we discussed were full patterns. We've described liver qi invading the stomach, we described phlegm heat in the stomach, and we described damp heat in the stomach. This is a deficiency pattern, very common. Stomach and spleen are weak, empty, and possibly also cold, but not necessarily cold. And by definition, of course, this stomach pain, if it's from deficiency, by definition is much milder than the other 3 patterns. And also an important characteristic of this pain from emptiness is that it gets better after eating, and also better with slight pressure. The pulse is weak in general, empty or weak or fine. If the pulse is worried, it is definitely not this, okay, as I said earlier. And this is actually a very a type of pattern, type of problem that would react really well and relatively easily to both acupuncture and herbal treatment. And the treatment is very simple. The points that I use to tonify the stomach are REN 12, first of all, stomach 36, bladder 20 and 21. Those 4 points would be essential points. REN 6 is there to tonify qi in general, and will be particularly good if there are loose stools. And pericardium 6 is there to stimulate the descending of stomach qi, because, by the way, also when the stomach is deficient, it could also, because it's deficient, it fails to descend because it's deficient. And the 3 treasures remedy is Prosperous Earth, which is a variation of the famous Liu Jin Zetang, the 6 gentlemen decoction. Very simple formula, very straightforward, tonifying stomach and Spleen-Qi. Very useful formula also for acupuncturists, supposing you're treating a patient with this type of pattern. It's very good to supplement the acupuncture treatment with a herbal remedy that tonifies stomach and spleen. And this is an example of a pale tongue. This tongue is also quite swollen. Ignore that black spot at the back. That's on the picture. It's not on the tongue. This tongue is pale. It's a little bit wet as well. So there will be here not only qi deficiency, but also yang deficiency. The second pattern is also, I find it very, very common in Western patients, and a very interesting pattern, Stomach-Yin deficiency. In terms of symptoms, you may have Stomach-Yin deficiency with very few symptoms. As you can see there, maybe a slight epigastric pain, maybe dry mouth, things like that. But I diagnose Stomach-Yin deficiency a lot on the basis of the tongue. And in Stomach-Yin deficiency, the tongue has no coating, or partially no coating, and possibly some cracks. And I find this very, very common. I see a lot of people with the tongue without coating or partially without coating, indicating Stomach-Yin deficiency. and without many symptoms. But it must always be treated because the stomach and the spleen are the center. They are the source of postnatal qi and blood. And if stomach-yin is deficient, then it will affect everything else. And by the way, why does the tongue have no coating in stomach-yin deficiency? Because the tongue coating comes from the activity of the stomach in digesting food. And it is actually the first origin of fluids. So if the tongue has no coating, it automatically indicates stomach-yin deficiency. Of course, in addition to that, it may also indicate yin deficiency of other organs. But whatever other organ is involved, because the stomach-yin is the origin of fluids, you must always treat the stomach as well. For example, let's say the tongue is completely without coating, it has a red tip, so I would diagnose stomach yin deficiency and heart yin deficiency because of the red tip. You cannot treat the heart yin deficiency without treating the stomach. You must always treat the stomach. And what do I do? The points are incredibly simple, just those three that you have in this slide. I use REN 12, stomach 36, and spleen 6, and that's it, to nourish stomach yin. And I repeat, I do that even in the absence of symptoms. And there are a lot of people with stomach yin deficiency and the absence of symptoms. There are many formula you can use. In the three treasures, we have two, central mention or jade spring. And they are kind of differentiated later on. We have some slides which show the differentiation. But central mention is a variation of Shenling by Zhu Tang, and which is a great formula, central mention, because it tonifies both stomach and spleen, and both qi and yin of stomach and spleen, and it also resolves dampness. So that makes it very, very useful in practice. And later on, we've got some slides looking at each remedy more in detail. Jade spring is a variation of Shashen Meidun Tang, which is more for yin deficiency. So central mention is for qi and yin deficiency. Jade spring primarily for yin deficiency. And notice that here in this slide we have 4 tongues. They're all quite different from each other, but they all indicate stomach yin deficiency. All of them. Some are redder than others. For example, the 2 at the bottom have a normal color, but no coating. So that is stomach yin deficiency. The ones on the top, especially the top right, is redder. So there is not only yin deficiency, but also some empty heat. And in addition to that, every one of these tongues has cracks. And the cracks confirm the yin deficiency, especially of the stomach. So I repeat, if the tongue has no coating, for me indicates stomach yin deficiency. The stomach is the center, stomach and spleen are the center. If the stomach doesn't work, nothing works. It must be treated even if they have no symptoms. And these are examples of stomach cracks. A very good one, probably the best one, is the bottom one in the middle, this one. The stomach crack is more in the middle, and it's kind of a wide crack, as opposed to the heart crack that will be longer all along. So all these 6 tongues here, they're all variations of stomach cracks, which indicates stomach yin deficiency. Okay, let's talk about abdominal pain, lower abdominal pain. So below the navel, below the umbilicus. And we start with the most common ones of Qi stagnation, which would be Qi stagnation of the liver, but also of the intestines. You can't have lower abdominal pain without Qi stagnation in the intestines. And I repeat, in my experience, it's usually both small intestine and large intestine. It's very difficult to distinguish the two. And some of the points we already mentioned. Rank 6 is there not to tonify Qi, but to move Qi. Pericardium 6 and 7 are to calm the Shen, because Qi stagnation usually comes from emotional stress. Notice triple burner 6 there. Why do we have triple burner 6? It's a long story, but the triple burner channel has a function very similar to the liver, free flow of Qi. So the triple burner also has a free flow of Qi, and triple burner 6 would stimulate that. And it goes particularly well with gallbladder 34, the two together, to move Qi. Liver 3 and bladder 18 are there to move liver Qi. And then there is stomach 39, which is the Hersey point of the small intestine, which is specific for abdominal pain. And I would use that all the time. I wanted to remind you, these are the points according to pattern, to syndrome. Remember the other points that I mentioned at the beginning of the lecture, i.e. stomach 25, I would always have, and possibly spleen 15. So I would always have stomach 25 in this case. And the remedy for this we've already seen is break into a smile, Chai Hu Shugan Tang, which we have discussed in the context of the middle burner. And we've already seen this picture of the tongue. This would indicate severe liver Qi stagnation because it's red on the sides there. The second pattern, incredibly common, Qi stagnation with dampness, the two together. So there is, because there is Qi stagnation and dampness, there is both distension or fullness from the dampness. And this could work both ways. There could be constipation, or there may also be loose stools if the dampness predominates. And the dampness will be manifested with a sticky coating on the tongue. So the points we've already mentioned, they're very similar to what we already mentioned. The only difference here that we have points to resolve dampness. Spleen 6, Ren 9, Spleen 9, Stomach 28, and Bladder 22 to resolve dampness. And acupuncture is very effective for most of these syndromes. And the remedy for this is called smooth passage, which we're going to describe more in detail very soon. This tongue, by the way, is an interesting tongue because it shows this syndrome quite well. It's slightly red on the sides. Notice it's much less red than the previous slide we saw. But it's also swollen and a little bit sticky, so indicating dampness. I'm going to talk about smooth passage in a moment. And the third pattern has three patterns: Qi stagnation, dampness, and Qi deficiency. Also incredibly common. And usually these are the three patterns which are, in my opinion, in my experience, at the root of what is called irritable bowel syndrome, i.e. distension more or less pain with alternation of constipation and loose stools, feeling bloated. Very often the symptoms are aggravated by emotional stress. An incredibly common problem in Western patients. So I isolate here the points according to pattern for Qi stagnation. We already discussed all those. We don't need to discuss them. Dampness also we have discussed all those points. All those points there promote the transformation of fluids and eliminate dampness. The 3 points for Qi deficiency of the stomach we will also mention, plus the 2 local points, stomach-25 and spleen-15. Of course, you will not use all these points. These are not formula to be used, but you can choose from those points. And the remedy is smooth passage. Smooth passage is specific for these 3 patterns: Qi stagnation, dampness, and Qi deficiency. And this tongue here is swollen, indicating dampness. It's notice how it's swollen, especially here on the sides. You see that, and that. That indicates spleen-Qi deficiency with dampness. Notice also how this patient would have this kind of syndrome, but the Qi stagnation does not really show. So I repeat, it may not show on the tongue, but it would show, Qi stagnation would show on the pulse. Okay, and this diagram here illustrates the situations of irritable bowel syndrome in my experience. In my experience, there are always these 3 patterns in different degrees. And I've got the symptoms there. If Qi stagnation predominates, you have a lot of distension and pain and worry pulse. If dampness predominates, you may have mucus in the stools, heaviness, fullness, slippery pulse. If Qi deficiency predominates, not so much distension, not so much pain, but more loose stools. So if someone comes to you and say, I've got irritable bowel syndrome, it doesn't mean anything. You must be very specific, and you must ask all those questions to identify what predominates. Because some people may come to you and say, I've got irritable bowel syndrome, when in reality, they've got diarrhea. They always have loose stools. So that strongly indicates Qi deficiency. Or someone may say, I've got irritable bowel syndrome, but they're always constipated. So the Qi stagnation predominates. So that's what I do. I always identify which of those 3 is predominant, which is very important for the treatment, and the treatment with acupuncture. And smooth passage was designed specifically to deal with those 3 patterns together. The next pattern is blood stasis. Not that common. Blood stasis would be a complication or a chronic result of Qi stagnation. And you would mostly see it more in middle-aged people, not so much in young people. Not that common as a cause of digestive problems. If there is blood stasis, in fact, it may be a bad sign. It may be a sign that there is some actual disease process going on, like ulcerative colitis, for example, as opposed to have just IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. And of course it would be a particularly bad sign if there was blood in the stools, which may indicate blood stasis. Notice that the points to deal with blood stasis are the same or nearly the same as those that deal with Qi stagnation. Because in order to move blood, you need to move Qi. So some of the points are the same we already described, but there is spleen-10 and bladder 17 there, which are more specific for blood stasis. And there is also the Chung Mei, that's spleen-4 and pericardium 6 together. They regulate the Chung Mei, and the Chung Mei is the sea of blood. So it's important to treat in blood stasis. And the remedy for blood stasis in the lower burner is stir field of elixir, which is a variation of the second formula there, Ge Xia Zhu Yu Tang. By the way, I haven't mentioned dosages. Assuming we're talking about adults, in all these cases of abdominal distension and pain, I would probably use between 4 and 6 tablets a day. Probably start with 4. If it doesn't work, it can always be increased. So in chronic conditions, for adults, in all these remedies I've mentioned, I will start with 4. If the abdominal pain is very severe, then I would use 6, probably, or even more. If they had very bad irritable bowel syndrome with a lot of pain and distension, I might use 6 tablets. And these are all purple tongues, different degrees of purple color, different variations. Some are bluish purple, some are reddish purple, but they all indicate blood stasis. And I repeat what I said earlier, I do not agree that in Qi stagnation the tongue is purple. These tongues are all purple, and to me they all indicate blood stasis, which is a stage further than Qi stagnation. Damp heat in the intestines is also very common, extremely common. Dampness flows down. Dampness frequently settles in the lower burner. And as you see, if you remember, we have talked about damp heat in the stomach, which is also common, but this one is probably even more common. Also deriving from eating foods which lead to dampness. And in this case, there will be the feeling of fullness. And usually there will be loose stools. And the tongue, you would see this very clearly on the tongue with the sticky yellow coating. And the points we have there are points that on the one hand stimulate the distending of the intestines, of Qi of the intestines, like around 10. And we have the 2 C points of the intestines, 37 and 39, which I would always have. Plus, you would have to add to these some of the points to resolve dampness that we have seen before, like Ren 9, Spleen 9, Spleen 6, Ren 5, Bladder 22, etc. And the prescription for this is also ease the muscles. It can be used for the middle burner and the lower burner, damp heat. And these pictures here all indicate various degrees and various types of damp heat in the lower burner. Notice how many of them, practically all of them, maybe except this one, but this one on the top left and the 3 on the bottom, notice they illustrate what I said earlier, that the dampness is both in the middle and the lower burner. It would be highly unusual to have damp heat in the lower burner and not in the stomach. and it's illustrated very clearly by practically all these tongues. I repeat, that's because of the connection between stomach and large intestine in the Yang Ming. Notice also various degrees here. Some have more dampness, some have more heat. For example, this one in the middle and the bottom, very sticky coating, that indicates more dampness. This one on the right is more dry, so the heat is more predominant. By the way, if you look at the black coating here, do not be too alarmed by the black coating. It looks quite dramatic, but it's not usually a serious thing. Black coating is just an extreme degree of yellow coating, indicates heat. So it just indicates intense heat with the dampness. And I've seen black coatings like that. They can go just even with one treatment, one acupuncture treatment. So it looks dramatic, but it's not usually a serious condition. And the next pattern is a deficiency pattern. Very common, spleen and stomach-Qi deficient and sinking. And sinking means that the patient, there could be loose stools, for example, diarrhea. For example, chronic diarrhea could be due to Qi sinking. But it doesn't have to be loose stools or diarrhea. It could also be simply a bearing down feeling. And I remember particularly one patient with this pattern with an abdominal pain for many years. There's nothing wrong from the Western point of view at all. And nothing helped. It helped it. And her pulse was very weak, so I thought this must be a deficiency syndrome, very weak and deep. And I asked her the crucial question, did she have a bearing down feeling, which she did, and it was a chronic abdominal pain from a deficiency and from Qi sinking. And it was helped just by 2 or 3 acupuncture treatments to tonify stomach and spleen and lift Qi. And the way I lift Qi is usually with do 20. And if I want to lift Qi, especially in the lower abdomen, I would do 20 with Ren 6, those two together. Lift Qi in the lower abdomen. And plus there is Ren 12, stomach 36, spleen 3, bladder 20 to tonify the stomach. And notice stomach 39 is there for abdominal pain. There are 2 formulas that you can use here. They both lift Qi, tonify Qi and ease the muscles, and breaking clouds. They are actually both variations of that Chinese formula, Bu Jun Yi Qi Tang. The second one, breaking clouds, would be better if the person is depressed as well. But they are both variations of Bu Jun Yi Qi Tang. And these are all pale tongues, different degrees of paleness. Some are more wet than others. The one at the bottom, as you can see, also has dampness because of that sticky coating on the root. Now, the next pattern is Spleen-Qi deficiency with dampness, incredibly common. This is a deficiency pattern with some dampness. And actually the previous tongue, this one here, the bottom one, would be a good indication of this pattern. Spleen-Qi deficiency with dampness. So by definition, in all these deficiency patterns, the pain is very mild. Better after eating, and better with pressure. And also in all these deficiency patterns of the spleen, there would be loose stools. This is very simple to treat, very effective. Notice the same points to tonify stomach and spleen. REN 12, stomach 36, spleen-3, bladder 20. REN 6 in this case is to tonify qi in the lower burner, plus the usual points to resolve dampness, spleen 9, stomach 28, REN 9, bladder 22, plus the same point, stomach 39 for abdominal pain. And here you can use two remedies, Soothe the Centre or Central Mention. The emphasis of both these two remedies resolve dampness and tonify qi. But with Soothe the Centre, the emphasis is more on the dampness. With Central Mention, the emphasis is more on qi deficiency. And these are examples of tongues indicating qi deficiency and dampness. A good one is probably the top right. It's pale, swollen, indicating dampness. It's particularly pale on the sides, which indicates the spleen. And it has a sticky coating. This is a very good example, by the way, of sticky coating, indicating dampness. And the next pattern is Yang deficiency, spleen and kidney Yang deficiency. This will be probably in older people, probably middle-aged people. And kidney Yang deficiency can be seen as a development from spleen Yang deficiency. If you have spleen Yang deficiency for several years, very often this will lead to kidney Yang deficiency. So in this case, besides the dull abdominal pain, there will be pronounced cold symptoms. Feeling cold, loose stools, diarrhea, slow pulse. And the points are the same to tonify stomach and spleen, and the points to tonify the kidneys, there are three main ones I would use: kidney 3, bladder 23, and REN 4. And notice that we got stomach 39 for abdominal pain and stomach 37 for loose stools. And the prescription that tonifies spleen and kidney Yang is strengthen the root. Before going on, I wanted to just show you something, some new ideas I've had on yin deficiency. I've already mentioned earlier yin deficiency of the stomach and how common it is. But something else I've noticed, mostly from looking at tongues, is that the yin deficiency of the stomach very often affects the large intestine as well. And it's not surprising because stomach and large intestine are connected in the Yang Ming. And if you look at these tongues, they're all missing a coating in patches. And by the way, wherever the coating is missing on the tongue, in any part of the tongue, it indicates Stomach-Yin deficiency. But in all these three tongues, the coating is missing towards the root. So that I would interpret that as a yin deficiency of the stomach, but affecting the large intestine as well. So I'm just mentioning this because it's an interesting thing. We see that often. I would call this syndrome deficiency of yin of stomach and large intestine, which is a syndrome that doesn't occur, doesn't exist in Chinese books, but it does exist in practice. And how do you treat this? REN 12, stomach 36, spleen 6, stomach 25, and stomach 37, which is the Hershey point of the large intestine. So this slide here summarizes all the remedies categorized between middle burner and lower burner. MB there stands for middle burner. LB is lower burner. And also categorized between full, empty, and full empty. So notice how some remedies are specific for full condition. For example, ease the muscles is for damp heat. Some are for empty conditions. For example, Prosperous Earth is a stomach and spleen tonic. And some are for both, the one in the middle. For example, Soothe the Centre. On the one hand, tonifies Spleen-Qi, but on the other hand, resolves dampness and moves Qi. So this is I think it's a very useful diagram to keep clearly in mind the categorization between full, empty, and full empty, and the categorization according to middle burner or lower burner for choosing a remedy. So let's briefly look at these remedies one by one, especially those that we've not mentioned. Soothe the Centre is a variation of the famous Xiang Sha Liu Jin Zetang, which tonifies Qi and resolves dampness. I have modified it slightly by adding things to move Qi as well. So it treats 3 patterns: stomach and spleen Qi deficiency, dampness, and Qi stagnation. And this is primarily a middle burner remedy, a combination of patterns which is incredibly common in the patients we see. And this slide here describes the remedy in a nutshell, the classical antecedent, and how it differs from the classical antecedent, with 2 tongues as examples. And I repeat, you will get this notes as PDF, so don't think that you need to write all this down. Prosperous Earth, very simple remedy, very straightforward. A tonic of stomach, spleen, and lungs, Liu Jin Zetang, the 6th gentleman prescription. Very useful for acupuncturists. You're treating someone with stomach and spleen deficiency, you give them this remedy to support your acupuncture. And again, these slides illustrate the remedy in a nutshell, the classical antecedent, and how it differs from the classical antecedent. Smooth passage does not have a Chinese antecedent. I have developed that myself. And it treats, remember, it treats 3 patterns. And it addresses the lower burner, not so much the middle burner. The 3 patterns of Spleen-Qi deficiency, liver Qi stagnation, and dampness, which are, in my opinion, the 3 patterns that you see in irritable bowel syndrome. The tongue on the left, by the way, is another good example of red sides from liver Qi stagnation. It's quite a good example of it. And this tongue is actually a great example of this 2 of these 3 patterns, because the red sides indicate liver Qi stagnation and the sticky yellow coating in the middle indicates dampness. So in this case, you don't really see the Qi deficiency on this tongue. Why? Because the liver Qi stagnation makes the sides red. So you could say that in this patient, of these 3 patterns, the liver Qi stagnation and the dampness predominate over the deficiency. The patient on the right, you could say that the deficiency predominates over the Qi stagnation. Break into a smile is a variation of Shai Wu Shugan Tang. We've already seen it. It is the remedy for Qi stagnation and for liver qi stagnation, especially with abdominal pain. And it can be used for both middle and lower burner. The original formula was more for the lower burner. And notice I've changed it slightly to invigorate blood as well, but mostly I change it by adding more herbs to calm the mind. Drain fields we have not discussed. It is a remedy for dampness because we have discussed damp heat so far in the middle burner and the lower burner, and Chinese books always stress damp heat. When they talk about dampness, it's nearly always damp heat, but it is not so. Many people have dampness without heat. You don't have to have heat with dampness. And if there is dampness without heat, you use that Chinese formula, Huo Po Xiaoling Tang, which is drain fields in the three treasures. Someone is asking me to repeat the points for stomach and large intestine Yin Shu. So let's briefly go back to this. When we talked about this slide, I talked about the connection between Yin Shu of the stomach and large intestine. The points are the same points for stomach Yin Shu, i.e. Ren 12, stomach 36, spleen 6, stomach 25, and stomach 37. I repeat, Ren 12, stomach 36, spleen 6, stomach 25, and stomach 37. So we're discussing drain fields, which is for dampness without heat, and it is incredibly common. As I said, Chinese books, when we talk about dampness, it's always damp heat. So this is also actually a very useful remedy for acupuncturists again, because if I should isolate what does herbal medicine do that acupuncture doesn't do, one thing is that herbal medicine is probably a little bit better than acupuncture at resolving dampness and phlegm. So supposing you're treating a patient that has a combination of qi deficiency and dampness, you may want to treat the qi deficiency with acupuncture and give her a remedy like this to deal with the dampness, which herbal medicine is particularly good at doing. And I repeat, this is dampness without heat, whereas this remedy here is the muscles, is for dampness with heat, which is indeed also common. And you would see it on the tongue. The tongue doesn't have to be red itself, the tongue body, but you would see the damp heat mostly in the coating being sticky and yellow. So this is the muscles, and the previous remedy, drain fields, are equivalent. They're both from dampness. Is the muscles with heat, drain fields without heat. Central mention is a variation of Shenling Bajusan, and Shenling Bajusan is a great formula. It tonifies both stomach and spleen, both qi and yin, and it also resolves dampness. So it's a very broad action for type of patterns that many of our patients have. And how is the tongue in central mention? It's like that. It could be partially without the coating. such as these tongues. For example, this tongue here lacks a coating on the right side. This tongue lacks a coating in patches and has some cracks. This one also lacks a coating. This is very dry. So notice how we don't have one tongue specifically indicating the use of this remedy, but different tongues, because it depends on the degree of yin deficiency. But a particularly characteristic tongue would be partially without coating. And Shenling Baijusan is a great formula. I use it a lot. And central mention has not been changed very much, as you can see there from the writing in green, has some slightly more yin nourishing herbs. Harmonize the Centre is a variation of central mention itself, so they're very similar. And what is the main difference? Let's look at this. The main difference is that it also moves blood, and I've modified it with herbs that treat type 2 diabetes. So it would be a formula more for middle-aged people with type 2 diabetes, maybe overweight, with some digestive problems. With the underlying patterns are Qi and Yin deficiency of stomach and spleen, with some dampness and phlegm in the middle burner too. So it is, you could look at Harmonize the Centre like a further stage of central mention. And I've got this slide here to show you a very dramatic example of stomach and spleen yin deficiency. Those big cracks in the middle indicate stomach yin deficiency. And these transversal cracks on the sides are typical of spleen yin deficiency. So spleen yin deficiency exists. We always talk about Spleen-Qi and spleen-yang deficiency. But spleen-yin deficiency exists, and it manifests often with dry stools and also symptoms such as dry lips. But spleen-yin deficiency, when it occurs, it's always in conjunction with stomach-yin deficiency. And this tongue shows it very clearly, the conjunction of the two. Stomach-yin deficiency because of the cracks in the middle, and spleen-yin deficiency because of the transversal cracks on the sides. And central mention treats spleen-yin deficiency, and so does Harmonize the Centre. Jade Spring is more for yin deficiency, so we're moving towards more yin deficiency of stomach. And the tongue indicating the use of Jade Spring is completely without coating. If you remember, the tongue indicating the use of central mention was partially without coating. This is completely without coating, and these are examples of it. All these tongues lack a coating. They've all got deep cracks indicating stomach yin deficiency, some of them also spleen yin deficiency. Notice those, for example, those transversal cracks on the sides indicating spleen yin, and so do these ones, spleen yin. And I'll show you in a moment other slides that compare remedies. So these slides here compare, correlate various tongues to these remedies. Notice this, for example, Prosperous Earth. We've got 3 for central mention, and one for jade spring. So in Prosperous Earth, it's pale, but with a coating. That's straightforward Qi deficiency. Central mention, they're all partially missing a coating. So it is Stomach-Qi and Yin deficiency. And this one with jade spring is almost completely without coating. So it is full-blown Yin deficiency. And these three tongues here compare remedies for dampness. Notice the difference between dampness without heat, with drain fields, and dampness with heat, for which you use ease the muscles. It's very, very, very clear on the tongue. And there is one purple tongue indicating the use of stir field of elixir with blood stasis, and two for smooth passage. It's very difficult to define a typical tongue for smooth passage because smooth passage treats three patterns: Qi deficiency, Qi stagnation, and dampness, which can occur in different degrees of severity. And here I try to illustrate a progression from Stomach-Qi to Stomach-Yin deficiency. How do you get to Stomach-Yin deficiency when the tongue has no coating whatsoever? Usually it's a progression from Qi deficiency. If you look at the first tongue with Qi deficiency, there is a coating. Then the coating is partially missing in the second slide. In the third slide, the coating is completely missing, but the color is still normal. And you get to the last tongue, the coating is missing, but the color is a little bit red. So there is, together with the Yin deficiency, there is empty heat. So it's a progression from Qi deficiency, mild Stomach-Qi and Yin Shu, to Stomach-Yin Shu, to Stomach-Yin Shu with empty heat. A progression like that. This slide here illustrates the three remedies which are for Qi stagnation. And we've discussed all this, and I repeat, you will have this slide so that you don't need to write all this down. And these three remedies are distinguished according to pattern, to location, and symptoms, and pulse. This we've already discussed. We've seen the pictures for this. And this table here illustrates more or less what I just said. There are three remedies here: Prosperous Earth, Central Mention of Jade Spring, and these three remedies represent a progression from Qi Shu to Qi and Yin Shu to full-blown Yin Shu, from Prosperous Earth, Central Mention, Jade Spring. So the tongue related to Prosperous Earth is pale but with a coating. The tongue related to Central Mention is partially without coating or a rootless coating. And the tongue related to Jade Spring is completely without coating. And let's leave this a bit. I'm not going to discuss these case histories, and I think we've nearly finished. Let's look at some of these case histories maybe before we finish. And this was a person, a young woman with irritable bowel syndrome, And notice the symptoms there. You must always ask about the symptoms to identify which of the three is predominant. Here there is pain, there is bloating, constipations. Pulse is wiry, but the tongue was pale and swollen, which is interesting. So the symptoms strongly indicate liver-Qi stagnation because of the symptoms and the wiry pulse, but the tongue also was pale, indicating Qi deficiency. And the remedy I use in this case is smooth passage, because it is the remedy that treats all three of those patterns. And I would start off chronic condition, an adult, probably start off with 4 tablets a day. And you can always increase it to 6. But generally I would use between 4 and 6 tablets a day. There is a question asking, do you see H. pylori stomach infection showing on the tongue? Yes, I would say yes. I would say that often manifests as dampness, i.e. a sticky coating, often yellow coating, but often associated with Stomach-Yin deficiency, i.e. partially without coating, patches without coating, but some sticky coating, possibly yellow. Okay, I think we can stop here. As I said, you will get a handout of these notes, and I just wanted to remind you about the various websites. MaciociaOnline.com has online courses, whereas the Three Treasures website has the complete manual of the remedies. And by the way, on MaciociaOnline.com you can also find presentations, free presentations on the Three Treasures, all the remedies one by one. And I also have slides here with the list of distributors. So I want to thank you very much for attending. And as I said, be patient, because there are a lot of people attending this webinar. Be patient in waiting for from me sending you the handouts. Thank you very much, and have a good rest of the day. For those of you who are in Europe, have a good night. Thank you.